Okay, today I want to share some tricks of the trade that I've picked up in my years of experience as a charismatic pastor. Some of these things are things that I've practiced myself, I've done myself, and other of these things are things that I've seen other people do. Either way, it's been a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a very long time, and I couldn't have it within my circles because of the cognitive dissonance. So I'm going to share it with you. Before I jump in, if you've not done it already, please make sure to like this video. Please make sure to subscribe to my channel if you like this content. Also share it with somebody who you think this may be helpful for. And if you're looking for community and want to help support what we're doing, man, consider joining our Patreon, and you can do that by clicking the link in the description. All right, so let's jump into this. And no, I have not shaved my head, but I don't care. So let's go. Basically, what I want to kind of get into this conversation about is how we're able to conjure moments of the prophetic and the miraculous, and this won't all be like, oh, fraud, 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 fraud. But I do want to have this conversation genuinely. So I'll start with one that I think will be kind of appetizing for people to know about, and by that I mean appealing, right? And so that's just the simple impact of music and group singing. This is actually a dynamo. Having the right music, having the acoustic levels right, creating an environment, and mind you, I'm not talking about the little old stuffy churches that you went to with your grandma. I'm talking about the churches that have people standing out with billboard signs as soon as you pull onto the parking lot, and then there's music blasting in the parking lot as well, and everybody seems super happy, super welcoming, super loving. These are the more seeker-friendly churches, and honestly, these were the churches I gravitated to. They did have a little bit more of a people-centric element, at least on the outside. But so you walk in, and everybody's super warm, super loving. There's like a love tunnel. They call it love bombing. And they're love bombing you from the moment you get there to the time you get into the sanctuary. And the churches I was a part of, even if it was before service, music is already playing in there, whether it's the live band or something playing through the sound system. It's playing, and then there's stuff engaging on the screens, and then you got the lights going. This is an entire neurological dynamic experience. You're being engaged in so many different ways. So, and then you get in there and you add singing on top of all of this. Now, there is plenty of science on singing. You can consult with Google on this, and Google won't steer you wrong. But group singing, number one, reduces cortisol, which basically reduces your stress levels. So you go in and you begin singing the song. I'm not going to sing right now. I can sing, but I'm not going to sing right now. But you sing something like, he washes over me. He sets my spirit free. I don't know, just anything like that. It's normally something in these type of churches that gets to a point where it's very repetitive, and then the music starts driving, the drums are really going, and so even if you got a two-piece and a biscuit, which is just a keyboard player, a drum player, and a bass player, and some really solid singers, you can really create a nice moment in those repetitive grooves where these people are singing these things to themselves, and depending on how they interpret those lyrics, which is probably the only saving factor in these moments, because if they truly interpreted many of these lyrics, it would be devastating. Like, some of these songs literally go as far as to say, I'm nothing, without, my imaginary friend, but, so, so if you go in and you have this experience, you're participating in group singing, it reduces your stress levels, right? So, you go and you're like, oh my goodness, I went in and I was feeling so heavy, I was feeling so burdened, and I've only been in here for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and already I feel lifted. And you're like, I don't know what to call that, question mark, right? I don't know what to call that. And then there's going to be someone there in that echo chamber to tell you exactly what to call that. And they're normally going to tell you to call it something like the Lord, or the Spirit of the Lord, or the Holy Spirit, or that was God, or that was Jesus. But either way, instead of actually engaging what actually happened there, they're just going to tell you what happened. But just imagine how helpful it would be if they were well versed enough to be able to say, well, you actually just had a neurological experience that you can have at any moment, and it can do this for you. That's, from a social engineering aspect, that is absolutely fascinating, and which becomes like mind-blowing and almost sad. Yeah, not even almost sad, just super duper sad that the church has had access to techniques like these that actually works so consistently that it can be reinforced every service over and over again, where people can be ready to leave a church and can hate the church. The pastor could have literally molested their daughter, and they could have one of those experiences in that church and change their mind about leaving the church. That's how powerful these experiences are. But contrary to popular belief, these experiences have nothing to do with any type of spiritual phenomenon. So reduces cortisol. It releases endorphins and oxytocin. And oxytocin is the feel good hormone. It's the happy hormone, and endorphins does some of that stuff too. And they both are connected with increasing your pain threshold or your tolerance for pain, as well as stimulating those feelings of social acceptance and inclusion, which works to do a few things for you in one of these services, especially where this service is being orchestrated by a charismatic pastor. This makes it seems like there's healing taking place. So you can just be in the frenzy of one of these moments, and the pastor doesn't have to make any claim of anything that they do themselves. And this is something that I've done plenty of times, not even really understanding what I was engaging at the time. But I say, hey, did anybody in here have pain when you got here and you don't have it now? And then at that moment, I didn't have to do anything fraudulent. I didn't have to lay hands on anybody. I just asked the question, and you're going to have plenty of people that raise their hand and say, you know what, hey, I had a headache when I came in, and now I don't feel that headache anymore. Or my back was hurting like bananas. I don't know if that's something people say, but my back was hurting like crazy, and now I don't feel that pain anymore. Well, that's those endorphins. That's that oxytocin. But then there's also oxytocin is because you're feeling more socially accepted. You're kind of getting lost in the environment. You're more you're more you're more likely to be vulnerable and empathetic. And when I say empathetic, not just meaning being willing to see things from other people's perspective, but to actually be impacted by other people's emotional experiences. And so if you see other people in the room who are having these very dramatic emotional experiences, you at that moment are more vulnerable to those, to be impacted by those by those emotional experiences as well. Almost like people in a funeral. You can be in a funeral with somebody that you don't even know, but just seeing a whole bunch of people crying, all of a sudden you're da-da-da. Or better yet, just watching Mufasa die on The Lion King. This is an event that you absolutely know is not real, has nothing to do with you, does not impact you in any type of way, but yet you'll still cry, except for the difference is there's no one in the movie theater telling you that's the Lord. But in the church service, you don't get the moment to actually wrestle with what it could be. You're automatically told what it is, typically from the platform. And I was definitely going to be one of those people to tell you that, because after I asked the question, and if you said yes, my headache went away, I'm going to say yes, God did that. Oh God. And then guess what's going to happen? Just by me saying that, I've now reinforced this idea that, hey, miracles are happening right now, and everybody has already suspended their disbelief to believe in miracles, so they're willing to participate in that moment, and they've been further hyped by what seems like confirmation for them, because somebody's headache went away, because their cortisol were reduced, endorphins were released, and oxytocin was released. All right, so I spent a lot more time on that than I wanted to, but to me, I do find that fascinating. So the next thing is prayer request cards. Now, this is not one that I actually participated in, and I'll tell you why. I hated prayer request cards. I could not say it back then, but oh my God, I hated prayer request cards. It was weird to me. The whole idea was weird to me. Like writing down your prayers. What? Why? How does that do anything different? It just, especially, mind you, I came from the early Pentecostal churches, so we were against anything that looked like witchcraft, but then all of the things we did kind of looked like witchcraft, so then you just didn't even know the difference. But yeah, writing stuff down definitely felt kind of like magical cards at that moment. And so I was never a big fan of prayer request cards. Even when I was a pastor, we had them. I did not like them, but we had them because churches have them, and people want to write down their business and give it to the pastor, which maybe you can see where I'm going with this, right? So prayer request cards, interestingly enough, do not just include information about the requester, but they typically also include information about other people. And that's where the gold mine of information is for a certain group of unscrupulous pastors. They'll use those prayer requests. You're not going to be so on the nose to take a prayer request card, submitted by Susie, where Susie says, I'm struggling, with some sin. And then you come in service the next Sunday and be like, hey, Susie, the Lord told me you're struggling with some sin. No, that's too easy. I'll give it that a lot of pastors aren't. I'm not going to say it. Well, I'll give it to you that some pastors aren't that bright, but you got to give them a little more credit than that. And the ones who do it that way won't last too long anyway. But typically what'll happen is you'll have information in there like somebody is praying for their son, and their son is dating somebody who goes to the church. So in that prayer request, they're giving information about their son, their son's girlfriend, their son's girlfriend's mom, and their son's girlfriend's children and cousins and things of that nature. And then maybe on a big service day where there's going to be more people than normal, that person the pastor notices that, hey, that person's daughter's mother is here, and I remember in that prayer request that they were praying for such and such. This is a great moment to kind of call that out, right? And so that information becomes treasure trove. And many times, here's the insidious part. Many times it's not even purposeful, right? These pastors, a lot of them are not. Some of them are not trying to defraud anybody. Some of them are as convinced as the people who are following them. They believe that they're experiencing a moment. Even like I shared on one of the shorts today about the phenomenon of disorientation, when you want to demonstrate a miracle, which is very similar to these cortisol and endorphins being released and reduced. You ask somebody where their pain is, they say it's in their back, and so you hit their hands and you keep hitting their hands and ask them, can they still feel the pain in their back? And they're like, no, I can't feel it anymore. And they're like, Jesus has healed your pain. And all you really did was you got their mind to focus on the sensation that's in their hands. Or you take them and you run them around the building and you say, can you feel that pain in your knee anymore? It's like, well, no, I can't feel that pain in my knee anymore. Well, that's because you got their mind to focus on something else while you got everybody singing around them. So you got all of these different neurological factors working, which are only going to produce temporary results, by the way, because it's just going to go right back down. It's all going to stable back out or whatnot. But it's just, you got all of this disorientation going on, and a lot of times the preachers who are doing that, they don't even know that's what's happening. They are being just as deluded as the person who thinks they're being healed. That pastor at that moment literally thinks, holy snap, something is happening here. They're saying the pain is going away. I'm doing it. They're really engaging it, because for many of them, ministry has been monkey see, monkey do. So the things that they're doing, they're not doing because some pastor actually came to them and said, hey, do it this way, and this will trick them into thinking this. They've just seen other pastors do that, and they wanted to try it, and then they tried it, and then it worked, and it's like, holy snap. Well, why mess with a good thing? Next time I do it, I'm gonna do it this same way, or I'll give it and put my own little pizzazz on it. But either way, it's gonna be working those same phenomenon. So this same thing kind of happens here with the prayer request cards. While yes, there are plenty of pastors who purposefully go through those prayer request cards looking for those third eye gold nuggets that they can use, or third wheel gold nuggets that they could use to convert to prophecy. But for many pastors, it's a lot more subtle than that. It's just, they got all these prayer request cards and they know they're supposed to be doing something with them. So they're reading them and they're praying over them, and they're reading them and they're praying over them. And then they get into service, because now some of this has got in their memory and service kind of gets good. And then they see somebody in this service who they recognize from being mentioned in one of the prayer request cards, and they feel like it's a good service, and they think, well, man, surely if I'm remembering that prayer request card, that must be God, because we're not going to explore the actual psychological manifestations. I don't even want to use that word. No, we're not even gonna pay attention to the cognitive faculties that are at work there. Instead, we're going to immediately attach God to that question mark and say, this must be a God moment. God must want me to, God made me remember that person's information from the prayer request card. So God must want me to share that information in this service because that person is in this service at that moment, as opposed to recognizing that, no, I saw that this person was in my service, and then I remembered that I saw them on a prayer request card. You can invert that even if you're well intentioned. Okay. Now, by that, I don't say that to excuse people, because again, I did say, no, there absolutely are pastors who do it intentionally. And typically what they're looking for when they go through it is financial information, emotional information, relational information, professional information. So it could be something as simple as, hey, please pray for Sister Shirley. She is really struggling financially. Her kids, they got student loans out the yin yang. And so then the pastor comes in next Sunday, Sister Shirley, God says he's going to clear that debt. And bam, all of a sudden you got something for Sister Shirley that's just life changing. Oh my God, God heard my cry, so. But this actually brings me to my next one. And this one is a little more devious. And while, yes, there can be people who participate in this unintentionally, to act on this information is not unintentional. All right. So, and this is one that I definitely never participated in because I hate this one all the way. So, and this one is the network of church gossip. I hate gossip. No, I hate gossip. This has nothing to do with me believing gossip is a sin. That was an old time thing. I hate gossip because gossip is literally the most unproductive form of communication that exists on this planet. It's talking about things that have nothing to do with you and things that you have no power to impact, to influence, or to otherwise control. So just why would you waste your time on gossip? Well, churches have made good use of gossip. So typically how this one works is there's a loosely connected group of members. Loosely connected. And this is the killer. This is why it's so hard to pick up on unless you're in church leadership. But there's typically a loosely connected group of members, which means these group of members do not regularly interact. They don't even know each other like that, which is why they don't all know that they're kind of playing the same role. And that is, they're just out having conversations in the congregation, having conversations with members, visitors, guests, people who've left the church, people who've left and come back. They're just having conversations primarily because they've developed a relationship with someone at the church that is really close to, and they want to feel relevant in that person's life. And so they discover that the best way to feel relevant in that person's life is to be able to talk about things that's important to that person. And so they assume that the most important thing to this person is likely going to be the stuff happening at this church because this is a person working at the church. So this is without anybody having to tell you to do any of this. This is just how the socialization aspect of it works. So you go out and you just talk, and they say, oh, guess what? Such and such got a promotion on the job. Oh, okay. Well, and you just bringing information back. You don't realize you're doing it because it's just everyday conversation. And we get so used to gossip that we don't even recognize when we're doing it, which has made this one to be so easy to capitalize on, and which is the reason why so many unscrupulous pastors do, in fact, capitalize on it. Because then that information like that just starts getting shared around the church. And then there are typically people set in place, especially for the unscrupulous ones, who have access to these loosely networks. And it's normally 3 or 4 people on staff. Typically someone like a executive assistant or chief financial officer, not throwing any shots there. Because it's so common, I have to say that, immediately in my mind, there were 4 churches that literally is how it works for them. It's a CFO, it's an executive assistant, it's somebody on the praise team, somebody high up in the music ministry. It's people who will be around you and will seem one way and talk about things one way, but it's really all kind of agendaed because they're there to collect that information. And then they typically all collect that information, and piece by piece, they share that information with the pastor. This helps prophecies seem to be so profound and so on point, because then all of a sudden you will say, look, you didn't tell nobody this. And, number one, people are always lying to themselves in church. Why? Because we kind of go in with this suspension of disbelief. But the pastor then uses that information typically in a counseling session or directly from the pulpit or from the platform, as we call them in the more seeker-friendly churches. But and use that information, and ultimately use that information in demonstration to convince his congregation and visitors and followers and all of that he or she has a direct connection to God, Jesus, or otherwise. And those who help facilitate this delusion and this deception are typically right there in the service at these moments to kind of help stir on or kind of cheerlead this with random shocks, random expressions of shock and awe on their face, like, oh my God, how did he know? I didn't tell him. You'll see it, like literally. You will see it almost every time that happens, and you see somebody looking at somebody saying, I didn't say anything. That's the person that said something. But this is very common, and many times you can actually watch for it because especially in the cases where people aren't even aware that they're doing it. In those cases, almost every time, all you have to do is watch the interactions and watch the people who are looking at each other, and you'll begin to kind of piece together who's doing what. Okay. So now these types of moments are reduced to just kind of parlor tricks, like knowing that you're, it's not reduced to just like parlor tricks, like just reducing someone's sin or not sin, but someone's secret sickness, or God, you're struggling with something, is God going to heal you? A lot of times these moments can become incredibly destructive by taking information that was never meant to be shared and then sharing it publicly in order to shame or guilt other people. This is often used to either shame people. These techniques are often used when someone at the church has done something that you don't like, that you disagree with, or are thinking about leaving the church, and you want to shame them and keep other people from making the same decision they make. Pastors will go so as far as to spy on these people in order to bring back information. Ask me how I know. All right, now I told you this video was gonna be a little longer, so here's the last one that I'll hit, and then we'll let it go. The inability of the believer to critically engage. Now, this is one that I've participated in. For at one point unknowingly, and then after a while, I definitely knew what was going on there. I myself in the beginning was not critically engaging these experiences many times. For example, I'd measure the veracity of whether or not something I'm saying to someone is truly prophecy, is not whether or not I really believe it came from God or not, because anytime I've had prophecy for anybody, there was always the question of, I'm not sure if this is God or if I'm just thinking this. And the way I would confirm if it was God or not was by their response. And so if I'm like, holy crap, this is God. This is God. That's proof. That's evidence. That's it. This is the scientific method, experiment done. I have the proof. Now obviously I wasn't that conceited with it, but if you would have tried to press me on it, I probably would have been like, no, what do you mean that wasn't God? I said it. She started crying. Who just cries when you say something random to them? Now, mind you, when you pose questions like that, you're posing that question rhetorically. You're not even trying to answer it. But if you actually did try to answer that question, you'd find out that there is an answer to it, and that yes, people can cry under the weirdest situations. But okay, so anyway, so again, this one can go all ways. You can take advantage of this maliciously, or you can be a part of this innocently. Yeah, I'm gonna get these words right. But it's, you have people who've come in who've purposely suspended their disbelief. So notice how even when prophecies fail, somebody says something and they get it wrong, or somebody says something and they say by this time next week something's gonna happen, and it doesn't happen, or when miracles fade away. So you say, oh, such and such no longer has to walk with a cane, and then 3 weeks later that Cain is back. Notice how when these things happen, that believers still refuse to question the veracity of that experience. So they don't say, well, maybe that wasn't God. Typically they'll do something. Well, maybe you did something where God took it away, because God apparently is incredibly gifted at Indian giving. That seems to be his specialty when you measure these type of phenomena. But also notice how prophecies are often described as specific when people are giving their testimonies, like he specifically knew what was going to. They're very specific, but when you actually begin to probe them about the specifics, they can only remember like vague details. Well, this happens because the specifics are often inferred based on the emotions of the individuals, and where in many cases the preacher themselves never mentioned any specifics at all. For example, the preacher can say, this trial that you're going through, God says, be strong. You're going to make it through. And those people who've been snickering behind you, God says, I got them. Don't you worry. That's all the preacher has to say. But as long as he says that with that dramatic inflection and with other people crowded around you, singing and crying and speaking gibberish over you, helping you, you will be tempted to interpret that as he knew exactly what I was going through, and he confirmed that Keisha and them was talking about me, and he gonna make sure she get fired. This is typically what happens. This happens a lot of times in churches, and so then the believer is the one who infers the details. They provide the details, which you've seen this with psychic. So someone comes in and says, it starts with an A, B, E, C, D, E, E, E. Why? Because they see you're now inferring by your willingness to engage. You're so willing to engage this moment, needing this moment, that you're willing to suspend your disbelief and engage this moment without critical analysis. If that makes sense, which I'm sure it makes sense. You all are so smart. I love y'all. So also notice how in a lot of these testimonies, doctors talk a lot. You will hear in a charismatic church, they're always saying the doctor said I had cancer, but then when I went back, he said the cancer was nowhere to be found. You hear this over and over again. Oh my goodness, now, I was going to say every time I hear this, I know they're lying, but it's like there were other reasons to know they were lying before, what I'm saying now. But no, so they're always saying, the doctor said this, the doctor said this, the doctor said this, and it's in all of the testimonies, but no one ever brings a written record of what the doctor says. Or even more, in many of those times, we don't even demand evidence that you were actually diagnosed with anything in the first place. All right, so someone can say, yes, the doctor said I had this, and then I went in for the checkup and they saw it, but then when I went back 3 weeks later, hallelujah, it was gone. And I've seen on several occasions in that it was a situation where a person saw a commercial, self-diagnosed themselves with something, went in for the doctor with the checkup, and the doctor said, all right, well, we're going to run the test and we'll see what we can find. And then once they came back with the test results, the doctor says, well, there's nothing here. And then the person said, you see there? They said I had cancer. But I said I wasn't going to do that. But anyway, so yes, that just threw me all the way off. I'm okay, so I'm done. Oh man. But yeah, so in claims of healings, no one's actually critically engaging this as a claim. It's just being said, and we're saying, yes, that's the truth. Even when a person is wrong with the first three things they said, if the fourth thing they said was right, we will say this man got everything right that he just said about me. I have seen a tendency after 2 decades of observation that there are extreme tendencies to presume, exaggerate, and outright lie. When it comes to the believer community. For example, there's a song that was one of my favorite songs as a former worship leader, which was, I believe you're my healer. I believe you're my portion. You are all I need, more than enough for me. Can't remember all the lyrics. But the guy who wrote that song because he was struggling with cancer. And then even when he was singing on stage, sometimes he'd have the cancer tank and everything on. Now, I just found out recently, and this is on his Wikipedia page. I don't want to mispronounce his name because even though he's like a scheming person, I was just trying not to say anything that would get me booted off of here. I still don't want to mispronounce his name. So, but just Google the guy who wrote Healer and find his Wikipedia page, and it's right there. The dude never had cancer at all. He literally lied to everybody about the reason he wrote this song and literally raised money to support his cancer, which I thought was mind-blowing, because if you believe that God is your healer, what are you needing to raise the money for the cancer for? But that's a whole nother other conversation. The point is, these things happen and are happening for real, and these are ways that we do this. It's important to note that much of the church experience is a sociological bond around the perception of trauma connected to everyday life. For people who are engaging in church in this manner, the expectation for them is similar to like going out on a date. They're willing to pretend in a moment, and preachers take advantage of that. I think the more we can get information out here like this to help them critically engage their experiences, at the end of the day, it doesn't rob them of their experiences. I'm going to do another video on spirituality to kind of help people wrestle with those, to understand that, you know, if you're having an experience, it's a natural experience. And so I'll talk about that in another video. We'll talk later. Thank you all for spending this time with me for 31 minutes.